Hello YouTube, my name is Sly. Welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this reaction. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, here we go.
Alright, this is by Nintendrew, and you're gonna talk about 10 weird NES facts, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let's check this out and find out what we got.
Hey guys, Nintendrew here. The NES is an absolute cultural icon, not just in the realm of gaming, but for society at large as well. From welcome mats to wallets, novelty t-shirts, drink coasters, and even this wonky backwards luggage tag I found at Walmart, imagery of the NES can be found everywhere. Everyone who hasn't been living under a rock for 40 years knows about this thing. But even if you're a collector as passionate as myself, there are still some hidden tidbits about this legendary console that you might not know about. And I'm not talking about like, oh, did you know that Super Mario Bros. 2 was originally this other game that was reskinned? No, this is some real stuff. So, let's jump right into it.
Nah, let's get into it.
Number 1. The NES library is tiny, but not in the way you might think. Okay, so it's no secret that the NES library has no shortage of great games. After all, the console saw over 700 licensed titles produced and sold throughout its lifetime. However, the data footprint of each of those individual titles is a far cry from the AAA titles that we're used to today. For example, the entirety of Super Mario Bros. Was written to 40 kilobytes of memory, about the same amount of data used by this JPEG photo of Shigeru Miyamoto. In fact, in 2015, a Reddit user by the name of RhythmGMZ estimated that the entire NES library amounts to approximately 237 megabytes of data. That's less than the amount of data you would use to watch this YouTube video in full HD quality from start to finish. Number
That's not really surprising considering how far games come since Nintendo first launched. Yeah, you gotta remember, back then, that was a lot of information they were storing on my cart. That's not a lot compared to now. But at the time, that was a huge amount of information. So, to say it's small, that should be in relative terms because of the way games were made back then, how compact it was, and the limitations of technology, right? It's come a long way. It really has.
Number 2. Some NES cartridges have a secret accessory hidden inside. As you likely already know, the NES was a remodeled and redesigned version of the earlier Famicom system released by Nintendo exclusively in Japan. The internal hardware between the two systems is practically identical, and you can even play Famicom games on an NES by using a third-party 60 to 72-pin converter. But what you may not have realized is some of the original launch titles for the NES in North America have a secret Famicom converter built right into the cartridge. Legend has it that during the Christmas season of 1985, demand for NES games outweighed the available supply, so Nintendo created a custom Famicom to NES converter so they could use their old existing Famicom circuit boards for US markets. It's also...
Now, I did not know that. That is interesting. That is neat. To make their own converters from, to go from Japanese to English, right? That is neat. I bet it didn't cost them all that much either. Cool. Something I didn't know.
It's possible that they didn't know yet whether the NES would be a success in the US, so maybe they didn't want to bother producing a ton of NES boards just to throw them away if the demand turned out to be low in the wake of the game industry crash of 1983. Nintendo themselves have not spoken on this issue, so for now, we're stuck with speculation. But here's how to identify if you have one of these special cartridges with a Famicom game board and converter built in.
Oh,
First,
really?
Converters are most likely to be found in Black Label or Black Box series releases, especially the 17 launch window titles pictured here. Secondly, these special cartridges will always have 5 screws on the back instead of 3. More on this design variation later. Third, the Famicom converter cartridges are just...
Now, I never noticed that before. I always thought the cards always had the same amount of screws. That's another interesting fact I didn't know. Neat.
Slightly heavier than their standard counterparts, around 4.5 ounces compared to 3.3 to 3.9 ounces for a typical NES game. Fourth, if you take a look at the metal contacts underneath the cartridge, you'll notice some small teeth where the board was separated in the factory. If those teeth are off to the side of each contact instead of in the middle, you very well might have a converter cartridge. But ultimately, the best way to tell if you have one or not is to grab a screwdriver, open it up, and take a look. If you do find one of these rare releases, you can even swap the Famicom board inside for another imported title, and play any Famicom game of your choice on your North American NES console.
Oh, that's even cooler. Awesome. So you can take one of these apart, take that out, put it in any Famicom game, and run it like normal to your regular NES. That is so cool. Now I know why they kept it a secret so people wouldn't do it.
Pretty cool. Number 3. The NES cartridge was designed to appeal to a wary American audience. If you've ever opened a typical NES cartridge, you've probably noticed there's a lot of empty space in there. The dimensions of the PCB within most NES cartridges could fit within the Famicom cartridge housing. After all, they run on practically identical hardware. So why is the NES cartridge so much larger in the first place? As I briefly mentioned before, the video game industry rapidly crashed in the US in 1983 due to a slew of low-quality, unoriginal third-party Atari games flooding the market. In the wake of this, consumers generally developed a negative view and an overall lack of interest in video games. In light of this, Nintendo tried to lure Americans back into video games by making some very careful design and marketing decisions. They named the new iteration of their home console the Nintendo Entertainment System, in a calculated attempt to separate it from the dying label of gaming, and to give it a more professional, high-end, mature image. The beefy, boxy black and gray design was intended to look more like a VCR than a game system, complete with a front-loading cartridge tray instead of the traditional top-loading standard, in an attempt to capitalize on the booming home video market. Furthermore, the cartridges were intentionally made much larger than necessary to appear more sturdy, serious, sophisticated, and futuristic than the toy-like Famicom and Atari cartridges. This flatter, wider design was also meant to more closely resemble contemporary forms of media storage, such as CD cases. Number 4. 3-screw versus 5-screw cartridges.
Okay.
Most early NES cartridges had 5 standard flathead screws in the back holding the case together, one near each of the 4 corners and one in the center. But sometime in 1987, Nintendo started producing cartridges with 3 specially designed screws in the back, also referred to as game bit or security screws, with one in each of the bottom corners and one in the center, as well as 2 locking plastic tabs on the top. This new cartridge style was labeled Rev A, which is printed on both the box and the label on the back. Although the purpose of this revision is not entirely clear, removing those 2 metal screws per cartridge would likely have added up to a significant decrease in manufacturing costs. Because 5-screw carts are less common, some particularly dedicated collectors have taken to building collections of them, driving the price up disproportionately compared to their 3-screw counterparts. In fact, the 5-screw version of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is one of the rarest, with very few being produced near the end of the 3 to 5-screw transition. The most recent sale of a loose 5-screw copy went for over $500 on eBay.
Holy cow! $500 for an old NES game? That's crazy. Yeah, key that game they cost me more than $30 when it came out. Whew, this cop that has 2 worth of screws? Wow. I'm at top. Okay, I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you for the follow. I sure hope I pronounced your name right.
Number 5. How bootleg cartridges passed the NES copyright protection. In order to maintain complete control over which games could be published for the NES, Nintendo devised a unique anti-piracy system called the CIC, or Checking Integrated Circuit. Also known as the 10NES, this system used a key chip built into each game cartridge, as well as a lock chip within the NES console, to determine whether any particular game cartridge inserted in the console was legitimate. Of course, as is always the case,
well, I hope my voice is soothing enough to help you sleep then. I do hope I pronounced your name right. Daimotoku. I doubt that's right, though.
People quickly found ways around this protection measure. Atari's Tengen brand illegally obtained the schematics for the CIC chip and 10NES code by simply requesting them from the US Copyright Office, and then reverse engineered it to create their own clone chip codenamed Rabbit,
right.
allowing their titles to work just like officially licensed games. Other companies took a much less elegant approach. In some cases, developers would utilize a voltage spike to confuse and disable the NES's CIC chip entirely, causing it to get stuck in a non-resetting state and allowing the game to run freely. Others still would require a donor chip or cartridge to function, as is the case with the Game Genie peripheral. The reason a Game Genie works is that it allows the attached cartridge to communicate directly with the NES before running its own custom code. Number 6. The truth about blowing on your NES.
Another interesting fact I didn't know. I've learned all kind of neat things about the original NES. I wonder if we're going to talk about the expected slot on the bottom that we never used. Okay. Is it Dima? Or Dima? Dima? Or Dima? Alright. Dima Toku. Thank you for the clarification. And welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy the videos. Choose the blowing on your NES cartridge to clean them. Now, I'll admit, I've done that before. So, we're definitely gonna find out if this is just a myth I fell for, or if it's truth.
NES cartridges. Okay, look, everyone's done it. Even you. Yes, you. Especially when you just want to plug in a game and play. But you've probably also heard that it's dangerous for your games. But why? And how damaging is it exactly? Nintendo's own NES Game Pack troubleshooting advice includes a note that states, do not blow into your game packs or system. The moisture in your breath can corrode and contaminate the pin connectors. But is this really cause for concern, or just a case of overblown paranoia? As it turns out, Frankie Vicciarello, host of the Digital Press webcast, conducted an experiment on exactly this issue using 2 copies of Gyromite. One copy they blew on every day for 30 days, and the other sat untouched. This was the result. Pretty gross, huh? So then...
Ew. I don't know what to make of that. These connectors look a lot cleaner than the one that wasn't touched. You know what I mean? right, Zib. Look at this. This is the connectors from the one that was blown on daily. Those look relatively clean, compared to the one they just let sit there. Now, granted, there are ways to clean them using an alcohol solution. But yeah, not unless if the moisture's wearing us down. But, I'm not sure about that. I just know this looks a lot cleaner. Maybe. That looks so corroded though, I don't know if that would work. Right.
What is the best and safest way to clean your cartridges? The answer is good old isopropyl alcohol. The higher percent, the better. Dab a little alcohol on a lint-free cloth or on the end of a cotton swab, and gently wipe away any accumulated dust and debris. Or even better, pick up a couple of one-up cards. These custom cartridge cleaners fit perfectly between the plastic and metal contacts of your games, and can get them back into action in no time. Number 7.
Now, I've used that as long as I've been messing around with carts. I've used that Q-tip trick quite a bit to clean them. It actually works pretty good. You can see how nasty they are when you first clean the cart and the clean a long time. That green oxidation off of there.
The mystery of the hidden expansion port. Looking back at the original NES 001 model, On the underside, you'll find a 48-pin expansion port hidden underneath a removable plastic cover. But depending...
They're gonna talk about this port now that was never used. Yeah, I understand, Dima. It's just that since I'm streaming, and I can't afford YouTube Premium, I kind of, don't want to hurt their financial prospects for the videos they produce. It's just my little way to help them out, what little bit I can.
Depending on exactly when your NES was manufactured, it may be a little harder to access. At some point during the system's production run, Nintendo chose to further bury the expansion port with the addition of another smaller plastic cover underneath. This second barrier is permanently attached to the body of the console in 6 places. In order to access the expansion port on one of these units, you'd have...
Now, I don't know if anyone talk about it, but somebody actually made a peripheral for this that you can buy even today. I forget exactly what it does, but pretty neat.
You have to physically break off these 6 plastic tabs. This expansion port was designed as a method of future-proofing, allowing Nintendo the ability to expand the console's functionality through possible peripherals down the road.
Right.
In Japan, the NES's predecessor, the Famicom, already had a port built in for the same future-proofing purpose. Once the console had established its popularity, this expansion port was ultimately used by all manner of add-ons, including a collection of third-party joysticks, a full-size keyboard, a light gun, an inflatable motorcycle, a punching bag, a drawing tablet, and even a stereoscopic 3D headset. But in contrast, the NES expansion port had no such luck. Sure, there were some prototypes in the works, including a couple of scrapped multiplayer modems, and even a home gambling system from the Minnesota State Lottery. But aside from these few failed attempts, as far as anyone can tell, no other NES expansion port accessories ever made it to the production line. And so, this mysterious connection serves no purpose other than to make us wonder what could have been. Number 8. The dreaded yellowing plastic effect. If you've been gaming since the 80s, there's no doubt
that just happens with plastic of all ages. Longer it sits around, the more yellow it gets. I'm just enjoying some videos I thought you guys might find interesting. Just hanging out with y'all. Highlight of my day, really. You guys make my day so much better. You really do.
Doubt you're all too familiar with this phenomenon. The plastic material used to make NES consoles is particularly sensitive to direct sunlight, and over time it will change from a bright light gray color to become more dull and yellow.
Probably.
The long-standing rumor in the retro community has been that this is due to the chemical component bromine used as part of the flame-retardant chemical within the console's plastic body. But that's not entirely accurate. In reality, the butadiene component of the ABS Plastics chemical polymer is photoreactive and oxidizes when exposed to UV light. This causes the butadiene to break down, creating carbonyl radicals as debris, which then go on to react with other components of the air and plastic to create that dreaded yellow hue. Throughout the years, various methods have been devised to counteract this. Solutions like RetroBrite use hydrogen peroxide to clear away these yellow-colored particles from the surface of the plastic, temporarily restoring the console's original color. But it's been suggested that this sort of method could make the plastic even more susceptible to yellowing in the future. So, my advice? Your best bet is to prevent your consoles from being exposed to unnecessary UV light in the first place. And if you happen to have a particularly bad case of discoloration, a fresh new paint job along with a UV-resistant clear coat might be in order. Number 9. The NES 101 update. In October of 1993, a full 2 years after the launch of the SNES, Nintendo released an updated and redesigned version of the original NES console, the NES 101. This new model...
I've seen something like this before. Right? The car's still stripping down like the Super NES. Because the original NES design, the way those things slide in, that mechanism wears out over time. Then you gotta fiddle with it. You gotta stick something in there to get the cart to work right. Usually like a clothespin and hold it in there or something. But, this, the only reason why I know about this is because I seen it in a pawn shop one day. I've never actually seen it in a store. So that's the only reason why I know about this. It just basically, you take the Nintendo, right? All the extra airspace, you take it out of it, And this is what you get. The job basically just no dead airspace like the original case would have.
Model was significantly smaller than the original NES control deck, and sported a much more sleek and streamlined form factor. The cartridge port was moved from the front of the console to the top, which is why it's often referred to by collectors as the top-loader model, as opposed to the old toaster system. The classic NES controller also saw an overhaul, with rounded sides and a...
Yes. They did this for the ergonomics, because when the Super NES came out, right, people were loving how the controller felt, as opposed to that square blocky thing from the original NES. So it's just an adaptation to try to make the console last a bit longer. Try to get some more life out of it before having to discontinue it completely.
modified button layout. This dog bone-shaped controller was intended to more closely match the design of the newer Super Nintendo gamepad. As far as internal changes are concerned, both the CIC lockout chip and power indicator lights were removed from this release. The AV output ports were also scrapped, leaving only the lower quality RF video connection. A couple months after the NES 101 launched in the US and Australia, Nintendo went on to release a redesigned Famicom console as well, called the HVC 101. The HVC 101 looks almost identical to the NES 101, with the exception of a flatter cartridge tray area and a multi-out AV connection instead of the old RF standard. This redesign further blurred the lines between the Famicom and NES system families. And finally, number 10, 4-player NES games. You've probably noticed that the NES has 2 controller ports, but you probably also know about the NES 4.
Now you can buy a dongle for these to make each port recognize 2 controllers. That's how you got 4 players set up on these. I vaguely remember the dongle. I was so young when this was out.
4-score and satellite accessories. These multi-tap adapters allowed specific games with this 4-player game icon to support 2 additional gamepads simultaneously. But how do they work? If we take a look at the connector of a standard NES controller, we'll find that, oddly enough, the only pin used for button input data is this one here. The others are used for power, synchronization, and other basic utilities. 2 more pins near the bottom are used by the NES for data from special peripherals like the zapper and the power pad, but these pins are never used by a regular NES controller. Multi-taps like the 4-score and the satellite take advantage of the NES's serial bus by increasing the amount of serial data available to the console through this data pin. With this method, a practically unlimited number of extra controllers could be connected in sequence. And because the NES gamepad has only 8 binary buttons, the information for any given controller can be sent with only 8 bits, or 1 byte, of data. First, the NES pulls the first controller port for data. The multi-tap then returns 24 bits of information. 8 bits for player 1, 8 more bits for player 3, followed by an additional 8-bit signature, which confirms to the game that a 4-score or satellite is connected to the console. The process is then repeated, with 24 more bits of data read through the second controller port. 8 bits for player 2, 8 more bits for player 4.
I guess basically an early version of a router. That is almost how a router works today. That's neat.
And another 8-bit peripheral signature. This entire input sequence is repeated each frame, allowing the NES to interpret commands from 4 distinct players at once. And with that, we finished our list. But here's a bonus for you. Did you know that Nintendo collaborated with Sharp in the late 80s to produce an extremely limited run of NES television combo sets? The Sharp Game Television has been a highly coveted piece of gaming memorabilia for decades,
I didn't know
and
this.
recently we took a deep dive into its origins and the mystery surrounding its production. If you love retro gaming like I do, you won't want to miss this. Definitely give it a watch if you've got the time. So, what did you think? Did you learn anything new from this video, or are there any points I covered that you'd like to see us go into more in depth? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you liked the video, please do consider subscribing to Nintendrew for all sorts of cool gaming content, and make sure to share it with any friends who might find it interesting. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye!
Oh, that was interesting. Thank you to Nintendrew.